Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. As you probably know, there are some big changes coming to AoE2, not only with the Chinese DLC just around the corner, but also a major balance patch that it sounds like the devs are aiming to drop in mid-April. In this video, I want to take a closer look at the changes coming to the Swordsman line in particular, which are wide-reaching and affect both their early and late game. If that idea sounds familiar, this is definitely not the first round of buffs to the militia line, to put things mildly, which in the past has already included free tracking, cheaper squires, the new technologies, arson supplies and gambizons, more bonus damage against buildings, stat improvements to HP, melee armor and attack, cheaper upgrade costs, plus increasingly strong infantry bonuses for newer civilizations like Romans and Armenians, which seem to specifically target the swordsman line. I've probably even overlooked one or two things in that list, and this is clearly an ongoing saga, with simply a new chapter being added next month of 6 different changes. To start with the Dark Age, militia are going to be buffed in 2 different ways. The first is their price is coming down by 10 food, with supplies being officially removed, but in a way 2/3 of its effect are just being baked into the unit for free, saving 30 food on your standard 3 militia drush. The other change is the militia line's speed going up from 0.9 to 0.96 tiles per second. The devs are really putting the militia through weight loss boot camp here, having them eat less and move more. Now militia were already faster than villagers at 0.8 tiles per second. However, considering a lot of their value is from forcing villagers to try to chase them down and engage to provoke some idle time, it'll just make them that little bit more annoying to catch. Combined with the cheaper cost, a pre-mill drush where you make a barracks around 12 or 13 villagers rather than toward the end of Dark Age could definitely see more play and up the aggression. Even something as simple as having your militia arrive slightly earlier can help them get past an early wall, and on a 1v1 map at typical distances, they should be arriving 5 to 8 seconds sooner. I'd argue where things really start to pick up though is the Feudal Age. The first thing to point out is of course supplies is no longer going to be available in Feudal, so at this point a 10 food discount is actually not as cheap as a men-at-arms with supplies would have been previously, though men-at-arms are clearly better off post-patch, largely because supplies was a bit of a trap. The main problem with supplies in Feudal Age was first the 75 food and gold cost, but then also the fact it created 20 seconds of an idle barracks. The discount, of course, didn't apply to any units prior to that tech, so the classic 3 militia drush never benefited, and even if you were going all in with men-at-arms, you had to slow that whole process down to get the tech, plus it took 10 additional men-at-arms just to break even on resources. It was ultimately more of a noob trap in Feudal than a compelling upgrade, especially back when it cost almost twice as much originally. So for everyone except maybe Slavs, a commitment of 5 or even 10 men-at-arms is going to be easier to do now, which is the flat discount. Even for Goths, who are having their discount bonus drop by 5% across the board, militia and men-at-arms are still cheaper than they were before, as the Goths lack supplies entirely. Slavs are really the only ones who feel like they're getting more expensive as they had free supplies, but even that's offset by getting arson for free instead, which is now going to be a Feudal Age tech with a new cheaper cost. Like supplies, arson gets a bit of a bad rap, adding +2 attack for infantry against buildings, which in the late game pales in comparison to the champion's 21 attack against buildings already. The thing is though, for men-at-arms and earlier in the game, it does have a pretty significant effect, not quite as much against houses, but against walls and gates you get a third more damage with this upgrade. Especially with its now lower price, that makes arson an intriguing tech, but not necessarily an automatic pickup. Like supplies used to, it's technically slowing down your men-at-arm production to some extent, but I expect we're going to see it researched now and then, and will really surprise some players how quickly men-at-arms will tear through walls. One of the big advantages of infantry is unlike archers, skirmishers, and scouts, they can actually be a significant threat to buildings. And think back to using men-at-arms in the past, where anytime a building previously got down to the final level of fire animation, that building would have been destroyed at that point if you had arson. Taking out a building early can really throw off an opponent's tight build and potentially expose villagers for even more damage. Of course, Feudal Age is also when their speed increased to match archers and skirmishers comes into play. That's going to make hit and run more difficult, no question, though keep in mind Celt men-at-arms are already about 8% faster than archers, and I don't think anyone would argue they're a counter to archers. I actually think the advantage we're going to see is men-at-arms being able to get away from archers, not chase them down, which is more often what you get from Celts, making it easier to keep their men-at-arms alive. The civs I think this is the most interesting for are the Romans, and to a lesser extent Malians and Vikings, that already have some innate resistance to archers to begin with, though Japanese, Celts, Slavs, Goths, and Armenians will also be civs that might embrace a stronger men-at-arms opening. The already common pairing with skirmishers is also going to be a little nicer to use, as those two units will now move at the same speed. Next though, let's talk about the Castle Age. Again, the price drop and speed are the main ways they're improved. The biggest change in dynamic, I think though, is for the 12 civilizations currently lacking supplies, notably including Romans, Incas, and Goths, where that tech being mostly baked into the unit for free is a big improvement, and presumably that's why Romans in particular are losing arson to offset it. I don't expect their new speed to really change anything about the crossbow dynamic, and again consider the fact that Celt longswords aren't really a counter to crossbows. Knights also win balanced resource fights, so I don't think the mid-game longsword is going to be revolutionary, and actually the changes overall felt more impactful in Feudal Age, except for one thing. The patch mentioned the Eagle's armor class is going to be reworked as a shock infantry armor class, given to the Xi'an Swordsman and Fire Lancers, as well as possibly other units. For that reason, more than any other, I think we could see longswords more commonly going forward, not because the longsword is inherently great, but because it'll be a counter unit with a robust +6 bonus against an expanding armor class roster. And finally, that brings us to the Imperial Age. In addition to the lower food cost and faster speed, some new changes come into play. The first is that the longsword to champion tech switch is faster and cheaper, dropping 200 food in 30 seconds. Between those, the timing actually feels situationally more important than the food cost, as if you're getting hit by an opponent's eagle transition, you want your champions now, not 2.5 minutes from now. Other changes include a stat improvement to both Imperial Age units, with Two-Handed Swordsman going up by 5 HP and the champion gaining +1 attack. To start with the Two-Handed Swordsman change, any improvement for that unit is especially nice for Bulgarians and Malay, which have a great swordsman line but lack champion, where the Two-Handed Swordsman is not just a stepping stone, it's actually the destination. Now 5 HP doesn't sound like a lot, but just out of curiosity I did the math, and with a standard 4/4 armor without gambesons, any unit that deals 14 or less attack, 16, 19, and a few other specific values, they'll require at least one more hit to defeat them. Notable units that don't fall into that include the Paladin and Champion. Taking one extra attack isn't earth-shattering, but just about every unit will be impacted by the change, and with gambesons, any ranged unit with 15 or less pierce attack also requires at least one more hit against every two-handed swordsman, which is pretty much all of the ranged units. Funny enough, hand cannoneers still take the same number of shots if you have gambesons, as they have 27 attack against infantry, which is one example where surviving an extra shot would actually have been pretty nice to snag, but unfortunately don't. For most civs though, two-handed swordsmen are just a temporary stop on the way to champion, which for their part are gaining +1 attack. Again, it's not a flashy change, but will now bring them up to match the attack of a paladin and elite berserk. For a few examples of where +1 attack makes a concrete difference, some common situations include needing one less hit against fully upgraded paladins, halberdiers, champions, hand cannons, and elite step lancers. On the flip side, there are many common, especially low HP units where the math doesn't change, including arbalesters, skirmishers, hussars, and villagers that take the same number of hits from full health. So the point is, it does make a difference in some situations, but is not as wide-reaching as a two-handed swordsman's HP. I should note the two-handed swordsman's +5 HP doesn't carry through to the champion, but champions are still holding on to the cheaper cost and slightly faster movement speed in addition to the new +1 attack. Late game champions, I expect, will end up feeling basically the same, being a generalist trash counter, hard eagle, and now fire lancer counter, and with a good civ bonus, are just an all-around high-value melee unit. Notably, the Roman legionary shares in the speed increase without the +1 attack, but again for them, Goths, and Incas who didn't have supplies, they're just getting cheaper than they were before. So that's a deeper look at the upcoming changes, and how I expect they'll ripple through each age. As you can probably tell, I think the biggest impact is going to be in Feudal, though Castle Age longswords being a counter to some of the new units is something to keep an eye out for. I'm hoping it's enough to make some of the infantry civs actually start to be played like infantry civs, and letting players commit to infantry earlier with a cheaper cost, give them more damage potential against buildings, and not be quite as hard countered by a small group of archers all seem like promising ways to do that. Then again, we've seen attempts like this with infantry before, and time will tell if this is the push they needed. At the least, Armenian, Roman, and Goth players are probably looking forward to the next patch, which appears to be planned for just a couple of weeks from now. That'll do it for this one though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.